Hello and welcome to Adventures in AI, where the Insight Flow team members share things that have caught our attention over the past week and talk about our own experiences in the world of AI. I'm Giles.
I'm Rich.
And I'm Graham. And today I thought it'd be really useful to talk about the role of AI in learning and training and staff development. It's for a couple of reasons. One, it's a very direct and real application of AI that businesses should be aware of and starting to use. And secondly, it's an area that we as Insight Flow are already working very hard on. And I think that there's an awful lot to be learnt from both the outside world and potential applications and also from what we're doing. So Giles, what are your thoughts about it and where do you think we should begin?
So I think when you think about training and staff development, a lot of people think about doing a formal training course or, logging into a learning management system and following the course, and that's your formal learning done. And, that still has a place. But I think when you're thinking about AI and its role in training and staff development, I think it's worth thinking also about the role of both continuous learning, but also the idea of mentoring and, how do you actually provide a wrapper, if you like, around someone new in the team or around someone who's learning new skills to help them as they transition from kind of the basic understanding of a new skill to actually mastering it. And so for me, there's this concept of continuous learning that says we can start learning in bite-sized chunks, and that becomes a sort of daily routine. And so learning itself as both in terms of skills and knowledge becomes something that you do on a daily basis. And with AI assistants and things, there's the possibility to have, if you like, a mentor that can help you with that.
But I think it's really interesting. I think there's a key thing there, though, that what you're talking about is actually, the application of AI possibly starts to make it really different from a traditional view.
I saw it was a funny short recently, and it was basically a video with very high BPM music saying when you've forgotten, it's the last day and you've forgotten to do your training course, and it's someone just rapidly clicking next. And it's funny, but that happens quite a lot, maybe not quite to that degree in organizations, but you just have these very small, intense bursts of education when you have time to do it or just before the deadline. And that's actually not the best way of learning. And I know certainly I find like throughout my day, I have certain questions that might crop up, and it would be really useful just to be able to go into a session, ask a potentially stupid question to an AI, so I'm not embarrassed to ask it, and then get back to my work. And kind of that's what I've been doing in terms of helping me set up mentors for areas of work that I'm working on. And it's a much better way of working because you're integrating that knowledge in with your work process, and it helps you to learn as well. Because if you're learning something that you need to know immediately, and then immediately put it into practice, you're actually more likely to remember it.
So certainly what I'm finding with knowledge around programming specifically, where often, I'm using libraries that I've not used before, or I'm using or trying to work out how to do something, and actually having a mentor by my side. In the old days, you would do that with pair programming, where you get somebody to come and look at what you've written, and they would then help you try and find the issues. And actually, probably 80% of the time when you did that, if you explained the thing you were trying to do, the process of explaining it itself actually helped you solve the problem. And so having an assistant there all the time that can answer questions that relate to the skills that you need in order to achieve your job, just that, I suppose, function of having what feels like somebody there that you can ask the questions to, that is helpful. And then, if you lay that on top of that, a layer of corporate knowledge and other things that can help you to do it in a way that's specific to the organization that you're working for. Obviously in programming terms, that would be things like, well, what are our naming conventions and how do we structure things and all this kind of stuff. You can actually start to get quite deep into the skills that somebody needs to do their job really effectively, and provide a really useful mentor and coach and advisor for them, that helps them actually build that into their day-to-day work.
And when you're talking about providing a mentor or a tutor in that way, I mean, this is clearly an AI-driven thing. What does the implementation at that level look like?
So a lot of it is really this concept of a knowledge base. So you have really, you essentially have a knowledge base, and you have a chat assistant, which is usually communicating with an AI large language model. Not always, actually, but usually. And the idea is that you're scoping what it's answering specifically to that knowledge base, or to that knowledge base plus some other things. So what it would allow you to do, and actually, if we take a more general example of something that we're working on at the moment, if you take, equity, diversity, inclusion, development for leadership, which is the thing that we're working on, you may have a particular way that you want to describe that to your leadership team, or to the people that you're trying to develop those skills in, and that understanding. And so you can actually put a knowledge base together and get the assistant to answer questions about that, or even to prompt sort of almost the daily habits of, have you remembered to talk about this in this way, or have you asked your team this, or so I think it's that combination of company knowledge, information, the way they want to present things to their staff, the way they want to work with their staff. All of those things become, if you like, training material or prompting material for the assistant. And doing it that way allows you to make it very specific to your organization without actually having to put too much work in. And also, you can make that continuously learn as well. So for example, if a team member goes, I found this really good way of describing this to my team, they could either record it as a video and put it in the repository and get a transcript, or they could just, write it in, if you like, or even if the assistant has provided a really useful summary of something, you can save that into the repository for it to use itself in the future. So I think, there's a number of different ways, but fundamentally it's connecting an AI with a repository of information that's specific to the organization, and telling it just to use that.
If you think as well more broadly about how we transfer knowledge, and certainly this is the case in the training that we've been working on, typically you have a very large knowledge base or set of resources, and then you work to refine that into the knowledge that you want to transfer. And the problem with that, with kind of more with workplace learning, or where there's a large number of individuals, is you're making a guess at to how can I best condense this that will be helpful to the most people. But it's very common for you not to be able to kind of catch everybody in that description. But what having a knowledge base actually enables you to do, it's you have more chances for you to help an individual person and at an individual level, because there's more information there, and people can ask the questions that are more relevant to them.
I think one of the other ideas that I quite like that this makes possible, and particularly the idea of the knowledge base, is the concept of sharing experience. So learning, one of the values of formal learning actually sometimes is just going into a room with a bunch of other people who are trying to learn the same thing, and you get effectively a bunch of peers that ideally are in the organization that you're in, and therefore you can kind of tap them up when you're going, I'm really struggling with this bit, how does it work? And what you potentially end up with is being able to capture that digitally, so it goes into the repository and you have case studies of here's what worked well and here's what didn't, or even more of a showcase that goes, here's the stuff we're really excited about that we've produced having learnt this skill, for example. So you can go more into the why should I bother learning, as well as just the fact of learning things themselves as well. And I think, this comes back to, for me, a training course is a very limited way of learning. And it doesn't really deal with the full life cycle of mastery. So if I think about what does it take me to get from knowing nothing about something to mastering it, actually the basic knowledge is the very first part of that journey. The habits, the repetition, the inspiration, all of the things that are required to keep me going to become highly skilled in something, actually are after that initial training. It's like saying, well, you learn to kick a football and you might be able to kick it, but actually, can you score a goal in a World Cup final? Almost certainly not. That requires lots and lots of application and training and all, and I think there's for me, that's the part that informal learning is missing.
So I think one of the things you're both saying is that there's a sort of real obligation to think about the application of AI in this context of training and learning, and what within the organisation is to say, actually, you take it away from the traditions of formal learning and to make it much more personalised to the person, to their role, to their seniority, but also to make it much more fluid, to make it available much more of the time, and sort of to a certain degree outside the context of a formal learning structure.
So I'm not sure I've made my own mind up on this. So I'd kind of ask a question to you both. What do you think the balance is between having AI as an environment for personal learning, and if we're thinking about it in a business context, as a business monitoring that to see what people are asking so that you can potentially help them and your other employees more? And for me, the one I'm not sure about is, I think I'd be more open about my questions, i.e. I'd be happy to ask more stupid questions if I knew it wasn't being fed somewhere that maybe my bosses could see.
Well, I think there's a thing here that says, any interaction, we intellectually know that any interaction we have with the company's technology is theoretically observable by the company. And for the most part, for better or for worse, largely ignore that fact. So I'm not sure to the degree to which that will curtail it. But I suspect that the counterpoint that says that the value of having somebody or an AI that is your personal AI, that is structured for your personal context, your personal level of development and so forth, and has learned that, becomes so useful and so instinctively something that you would turn to, that the concerns about what you're saying to it slightly get diminished by the immediate value and the ongoing immediate value.
Yeah, I think so. My view on this is it's actually more about the specific situation and the specific skills. So I think different employers will have different views on the level of formality, and a lot of it will depend on the situation. I mean, if you take things like health and safety training or IT security training, then obviously that's got to be at the more formal end, because there's sort of insurance related issues if the staff haven't followed a safe procedure, or there are implications beyond the organization, which means that they have to have a call it tick box exercise for the staff to say they've been through this training and they've completed it properly. And so I don't think for me that's not the part that AI will help most with, although actually that doesn't stop it from continuing to mentor them on health and safety and making sure that people are still considering things around that. But so I think for me it's when you're talking about skills to do a job, even the extent of things like organization. So how do I organize my time? How do I make sure I get the most out of my day? How do I make sure I'm as productive as I can be? Which the interesting thing is you can see that as a positive or a negative depending partly on your attitude towards your job and your employer. But But I think that as a general rule, if it's about demonstrating and helping an individual to optimize how they work, and is not necessarily something that's monitored by an employer, then I think it can be incredibly helpful for people. And they may well find they end up working less and achieving a lot more through that kind of mentoring.
So, Giles, you started off the podcast by saying that it's not about formal learning, and I get that, and I think that there's really exciting opportunities to change the relationship between the organisation and their staff around this. And it also, from what you're saying, that we're looking at a world that where even the idea of learning slightly goes by the board, in that what we're talking about here is a whole range of different types of conversations that range from how do I best do this specific task to much more general things about me as an individual or the knowledge that the organisation has. And that all sounds amazing, and I think is a massive change. But of course, I think it's well worth pointing out that the formal learning process is also massively enhanced by AI. That the idea that says that those organisations that want to do modular, formalised training, and those areas, as you mentioned, is IT security and health and safety, and those classic things where there's a regulatory impact on doing it in a specific way and building up a specific set of knowledge, can also be massively helped by AI.
As a company as well, when you have had to, or if in the past you've delivered kind of mass training, the only way to kind of get results, I suppose, efficiently, is if your testing is through tick box exercises. And I think it's also worth reminding ourselves that AI can mark your, say, written answers in a way that was previously impossible. And things you can do then is you can analyze people's responses to see where people are struggling much more effectively than if you just knew that they ticked the wrong box in a question.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that is a direction I think we would like to take this, but probably aren't yet, is the ability of an AI to generate more tailored learning materials. So if you think about formal learning, you spend quite a lot of time putting a course together. You try and make sure it's relevant and interesting, but actually, take the health and safety example, it has to cover a number of things, and generally the whole organization will go through the same training regardless of whether it's relevant to individual jobs or not, and certainly not tailored to why it might be relevant for their job. And so I think that ability to start tailoring content of different sorts to the specific role, I think AI has the potential to reduce the friction in creating that and the effort, and therefore make it feasible to actually start creating highly tailored training to individuals. And that's at the at the formal end rather than the more informal end. So I think there's potentially some exciting developments, which, to be honest, I haven't given that much thought, and I don't think we've really looked at it properly yet. But I think there's some exciting opportunities there as well.
But taking that theme, so the stuff that's exciting in the future. But I know that you guys in particular are doing a lot of work around the EDI context for various of our clients. So perhaps it's worth very quickly just looking at the case study of what is entirely possible today and what we're doing around in a very formal learning environment.
Yeah, so I suppose if you take how do you deliver a course, and if you consider that course to be in this case it's a leadership development course that we're hosting, and there are a few things that you probably want to do when you're developing a leadership level in an organization. So one of them is, how do you get people to feel like they're learning as a cohort and part of a cohort, and how do you get them interacting with each other? How do you kind of stimulate the discussion? So particularly in that area, stimulating the discussion in the organization and getting them to talk about it as a way of changing the culture in the organization. And so having the ability to kind of include discussions, allow people to take their own notes and understand what it means to them individually, and sort of take their own personal takeaways, I think is a really important thing. So if you have both a personal knowledge base and a company knowledge base, then you can take away what you want from the learning yourself. We're also creating a more general repository of knowledge around EDI. So having access to that, as well as the formal learning and the things that people have shared in the organization, and then overlaying that with an AI to say, okay, right, I want to ask questions about what do we as an organization know about this, or what is what's the legal framework for X, and the AI can answer those kind of questions for you. That becomes really helpful to an organization, and it just makes it much quicker for someone to engage. If they're thinking about it, they could do a Google search, but actually the Google search might not give them what the company perspective is on it. Or so, if you take, I don't know, what's the legislation around X, it might even give you the wrong country's legislation, or, and if you don't really know what you're looking for, you won't know if it's right or wrong. So that part, it can take out some of the risk associated with people going off on the wrong path for an organization, but it can also just get them to an answer much quicker from an individual perspective as well.
I think it's worth mentioning as well, and this is relevant to the work that we're doing. It's finding a blend between actually delivering some form of training and then having this knowledge base where people can ask questions. So the work that we're doing also includes some short form videos as well, because and this will be different on topic by topic basis, but sometimes you need to deliver a bit of training for people to come up with questions and question what they're being taught. And this is the perfect way to do that, to kind of get them thinking about the right things, and then either you can let them kind of stew on it for a while, or immediately. That's the brilliant thing about having a knowledge base, and then they can go in and start to discover and explore with their own questions.
And I know, sorry, just following on from that, Rich, this idea of delivering video, and again, it's something that I know that we've been looking at, this idea of using AI to deliver tailored video, to create and deliver tailored video, has become a really interesting part of the potential that AI is helping us construct new ways of talking with people.
Yeah, so with AI and video, I think at the moment what it's good enough at is voiceovers. I've certainly tried to I've tried to replicate my own voice with AI, and I don't think it fooled either of you, but at least it sounded like a human, even if that human wasn't necessarily me. There are tools as well that let you create a video around a description. Now, obviously, this very, very greatly depends on the quality of the input and how well you describe it. And it's I wouldn't say it's at the level at the moment where you would want to deliver that, certainly in a kind of more formal professional setting. But the really easy kind of halfway solution between those is just if you set up a set of slides and then get an AI voiceover on top of it, then kind of that marries the two really well.
And that's about 90% of LinkedIn learning, isn't it?
I was just enjoying the idea that AI hasn't quite yet managed to capture the full beautiful nuance of the very slight Birmingham area accent that you have.
Birmingham accent. Yeah, you're setting it a fairly hard task there, I think. But also, when we finally do achieve RichBot, then then it's going to be an interesting world. We can have many riches. So I think the other thing about or an area that I think is important, and it's certainly one that we're deeply passionate about, is the idea of humans and machines being able to contribute towards and edit things in that repository. And I think, for me, one of the things that's missing in a lot of the technical conversations around AI is the repository is kind of just a thing for the AI. Or it's just a thing for the human. So you've got your Google Drive is your repository for the human, and then you've got a vector database, which is the repository for the AI, and kind of never the twain shall meet. And I think that's a very short-sighted way of looking at it. If you've got the ability for the humans to contribute stuff that actually helps the AIs become better, but also helps the humans so they can browse through it and find stuff and see what's there and all of that kind of thing. So it fits much more naturally into the way they're already working, rather than having to kind of always go through the AI to get an answer that they're looking for. For me, that feels like a more natural way to do things. And it kind of, the way I like to think about this is the knowledge base is your corporate memory. And so the more you're able to allow humans to build up the corporate memory, the better trained the AIs will be. And if both are feeding off the same thing, then if you ask a human to go and find stuff, or you ask the AI to go and find stuff, in theory, all things being equal, you should come out with roughly the same answer. And so I feel that that's quite an important area that we're looking to contribute towards the whole sort of development of AI in this, particularly in a business context.
So I think one of the really important things there, and it's a fairly recurring theme around that knowledge production and knowledge retention piece, is this idea that stuff does not get lost. And whether it's in the training and learning context or a broader context, there's this idea that says that humans and machines between them combine to build a permanent but frequently updated knowledge base becomes a really profound thing, and particularly useful in learning and development, but obviously much as useful in other areas of the business.
Yeah, I think to kind of counter that, because I agree, a lot of the time actually, the longevity of information and knowledge to a certain extent depends on the kind of knowledge, but the ability to kind of control and manage that and say, okay, well, for example, this is out of date, is also important. So knowing what you know and having retention of what you know, and the I was thinking the other day, one of the things that probably does cause corporates to struggle nowadays versus, let's say, in the 60s when people had a job for life, is actually in the old days when people were in an organization for most of their life, you always had corporate memory, and that was retained within the people. And so someone could tell you, no, stop being an idiot. We tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work, and it's not going to work now. Or at least you can, talk it through. And actually, increasingly, organizations don't have that now. Now, not saying they don't have people that stay for a long time, but actually quite often they're not accessible to all of the teams, or there are reasons why that human corporate memory can't be accessed. And so I think it's really important at that point to start thinking about, well, what's the way of allowing that to be retained and kept, and the knowledge bases provide us with a fantastic opportunity to do that, and do it in a way that that an AI can access.
Cool. So, I mean, we're hearing about and have talked a lot about the benefits of AI, both in formal and informal, and actually a preference possibly for informal learning and development. How would an organisation today go about setting it up? What do they need to think about in this term? Given that we're saying it's one of the most accessible of the current applications of AI, and most, or an area that's likely to deliver real immediate benefit to an organisation, what do they need to think about in terms of setting it up? What are the steps that somebody listening to this might want to go through?
So I think the first thing is really think quite deeply about where you want it to make a difference. So, we've obviously covered some of the areas. But if you start, you could, for example, so I'd recommend first of all starting small and starting in an area where you can you can make a difference in the short term, and that might be the personal development end of it in terms of actually the kind of mentoring of people in a role, or it might be a specific skill that you need across the organization. So it might be kind of narrow and wide, or deep and more broad. And then I suppose the second part is just thinking about, well, what is the, if you were writing a document that contained the knowledge that you would need in order to train somebody or bring them up to speed with a particular skill, subject area, whatever it is, what would that document look like? Because actually just writing the document and making it available in a knowledge base could be enough to have an AI up and running, pretty much. It's not, once you've got that encapsulated, and doesn't have to be one document, it could be 100 documents if that's easier, but the point is you can then pass that in and allow a chatbot to be able to answer questions on it, and that would get you started.
Yeah, I think that idea of starting small and actually working with what you've already got is a really great idea, because I guarantee you that somewhere on some drive somewhere you've got a kind of employee handbook or learning and development folder, even if you've never clicked on it. And actually, let's take the staff handbook example. In literally 10 minutes, you can set up that as a knowledge base, and have that as a resource for people to be able to start to ask questions with. So certainly start with what you've already got, so you can see how it works, see how people like to interact with the UI and with the training that you've set up, and then you can look to broaden it to things maybe that are more complicated that you already have, and kind of moving on from that. What knowledge do you not have at the moment that you need to start to bring in from other sources?
So the other part of this that I think is just worth helping people to understand is what's complex and what's simple. So as Rich was saying, at the simple end of the spectrum, you've got setting up a Q&A assistant that can answer questions based on a document. So that is actually relatively well understood. It's quite simple to do, and getting something like that set up doesn't take long at all. At the more complex end of the spectrum, if you want, for example, something to be integrated so that it would send reminder emails to people or prompt them in an environment that they work in. So, for example, if they work in Slack, then obviously that requires more integration with existing systems, and therefore you'd need to think more carefully about how to do that and what exactly you want to achieve. So I'd suggest for those sorts of things, and this is where, when you get more into the mentoring and kind of prompting as opposed to the just answering questions, that's the stuff where it's worth prototyping some things, and maybe thinking about a bit more of a significant investment into it.
And of course, what the AI can know instantly as well is if because it knows who's asking the question, if you've got a database of people's roles and that you can then link to their job descriptions, then it can answer the question very personally. So that's another kind of idea of the level of complexity that you can start to move towards.
So I think that, and this is an example from another client that we're working with, the ability to actually look at specific information and tailor what you're doing, or what the assistant is responding to, and how it's responding based on specific information about that person, their interests, either as by proxy through job title or something else. All of those things become the difference between a personal advisor, mentor, and just a generic chat assistant.
Cool. So it's easy to set up. It's easy to do. And it will deliver real benefits.
It's never entirely easy. So it's new technology. There are always going to be certain things about it that maybe, and also actually, sorry, it's worth saying, because AI is probabilistic rather than deterministic, as we've talked about on this podcast before, and I think I've got it the right way around this time. If you're expecting a yes, no, right, wrong answer, you may not get it. And so that's why proof of concepts, trying things out, rolling out slowly, all of the things that you would probably normally do with things like learning courses and stuff, to troubleshoot them, you would need to do with AI as well. So the actual creation of the assistant might take 10 minutes. It may take a lot longer than that, but it's actually everything that sits around that embeds it in the organization that is the part that you need to focus on at that point. So, as with a lot of these things, the technology quite often isn't the hardest part. So we've heard about some applications and how you might start to think about applying AI in a development and learning kind of capacity. We're quite excited about this area, and we think it has lots and lots of potential. We think it's worth looking at, and hopefully, you've from this podcast, there's some ideas about how you might get started and how to think about it as well. So I've been Giles.
I've been Graham, and if you want to talk to us at all about anything you've heard on the podcast or any other ideas or questions about AI and how you might apply it, email us at aiai@insightflow.io. That's aiai@insightflow.io. So I've been Graham.
And I've been Rich.